Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Led by India, South Asia is moving towards becoming the center of global growth and could contribute about one-third of the world's growth in the next 2 decades, according to a latest research by the International Monetary Fund. Under a substantial liberalisation scenario supported by stepped-up efforts to improve infrastructure and successfully harness South Asia's young and large workforce, the region could contribute about one-third of global growth by 2040, argues an IMF paper. Notably, under the IMF's geographical division of the world, South Asia does not include Afghanistan and Pakistan. For IMF, South Asia includes India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan and Maldives. The IMF noted that based on demographic trends, more than 150 million people in the region are expected to enter the labour market by 2030. This young and large workforce can be South Asia's strength if supported by a successful high-quality and job-rich growth strategy, leveraging all sectors of the economy in a balanced way. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyse what India needs to do to be a centre for global growth. Joining me on the programme today are Bhanuchandar Nagarajan, former consultant, World Bank, Washington DC, Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Executive Director, IMF, and former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Manu, let me begin the programme with you. Let's first analyse and try and figure out what the paper of the IMF really states about India leading the way and ensuring that South Asia becomes a global growth engine and the leader at that.
The findings of the report are not surprising at all. Like, it's something that we all knew, but they gave a number to it, saying that by 2040, South Asia will drive 40% of the growth. Actually, Asia Pacific is already driving 2/3 of the growth, world growth. By Asia Pacific, it includes China as well. So China's contribution is around 40% of the 66%, and India is around 20%. So India is already a major player in driving growth around the world. The IMF has actually based its positive projections mostly on demography and perhaps the trajectory of reforms that we have carried out in the last few years. Demography, our median age is 27, and though our southern states and the other developed states are actually kind of aging, as we saw in a previous report on Indian demography, but I think the bulk of the working age population, especially from eastern northern parts of our country, they are going to actually kind of be the engine for this growth. So how we develop this human capital and how we actually kind of make them productive will determine the extent of the growth. For example, we are already seeing that our young population are more healthy, more educated. They are actually, they have technology at their hands, so they're becoming more and more productive. So this will start a virtuous cycle, because ours is mostly a consumption-led economy. So as they become richer and more productive and contribute to the economy, it will actually further improve the economy. So there are actually many low-hanging fruits also that we can actually capture. The biggest one is our female labor force participation. It is the numbers keep varying, but it's around 20-27%, while China's is around 63%. So this is easily one of the things that we can achieve by actually empowering our women more into getting into the labor force and actually kind of helping them survive and thrive in that. So this is one aspect of what I call a socially sustainable growth, because sustainability is very important both ecologically and socially. Another aspect of social sustainability is the social security base that is being laid. It has been being strengthened over the last few years in terms of pension for the unorganized labor, the Krishi Samman Nidhi, the health benefits that are being provided. So these will help actually kind of provide the base on which this growth can happen. Ecologically sustainable growth, as we are in the middle of a pollution crisis in Delhi, it actually becomes very important to note that this growth number will be meaningless if it is not sustainable ecologically. So climate change is an issue like in which we are going to, we actually are making steps in like expanding our solar power, so on. So there's a whole gamut of issues, but it's important that the numbers that are thrown are ecologically and socially sustainable as well.
Right. Dr. Birbani, I'd like to bring you to the picture now. So, Banu has spoken about a gamut of things that have been done and that are in the process really to try and achieve this particular goal. But what more needs to be done, do you think, so as to ensure that India is the growth engine come 2 decades from now?
Yeah, just very briefly first, if you look at the last 15 years, China has contributed roughly 30% of additional world GDP and India about 15%. So India has already been the second largest contributor to world growth, taken just arithmetically. And this will clearly increase if, one, the growth rate is sustained, which obviously has two elements, the per capita growth and the demographics which he's talked about. So let's focus on the per capita growth, which is where the policy reforms come in. We have already in the short term, because I'm not sure you've taken stock of the recent issues in growth, the growth has declined to 5% after a long time. And so clearly there are a number of issues. And this has happened, I still remember in 2009 when I was finishing my term, in the last economic survey, I had pointed out that you have to continue with the reform process to sustain growth at the high levels that we had. And unfortunately, that did not happen. So we are at another moment like that now, actually. We've had pretty decent growth for the last 15 years, at least the last 5 years, and we need to now revive this policy engine. So what are the things which need to be done? And the analysis of the last 5 years, which I won't go into unless you specifically ask, tells us that there are a set of things which need to be done. One, of course, is the whole tax reform. We've already started the corporate tax reform. The GST, constitutionally that was a great idea, but the GST needs to be reformed. As it stands, it is not something which will sustain high growth. So it needs to be simplified, etc. Again, we can go into the details of that. And third, of course, another element which is on the table, the direct DTC, the direct tax code. As so many people have pointed out, we had a code which was like this thick. And clearly, if you're going to have a modern economy where companies have to be quick on their feet, which have to compete with the whole world in this globalized world, then you need a simplified tax code. And then underlying all that or encompassing all that is the bureaucracy. If we, when I talk to large foreign companies, their first number one complaint is the the tax bureaucracy. So that whole complex of taxation is one thing. Then there are, of course, sectors which have not seen that much reform. We have started doing a little bit of the education reform and also a little bit of the skills, but that whole sector needs to be looked at integratedly. There are tax issues involved, there are other issues, because in the modern sector of manufacturing, you need to be trained. It's not the general education or general skills are not often enough. So you need to make it like the Apprenticeship Act, etc., which must facilitate this training within manufacturing organizations. And then the third one, the other sector which has not seen any reform. I mean, education and skills, we've started the process. I think it needs to go much further. But the third element is agriculture, which has again been talked about quite a lot in recent years. There's been a committee of state chief ministers in the Niti Aayog, etc. But it's taken a lot of time apparently to get consensus. But hopefully pretty soon, in the next 3 months to 6 months, we will start seeing some agricultural reform. And the reason is that our traditional economy, which in fact is related to the pollution mentioned, this wheat, sugar, rice economy, which is very water intensive, especially in areas where the groundwater is depleting rapidly, really has come to a complete dead end. And any policy interventions which have been taken are just palliatives, which actually don't solve anything but make things worse. So we've got to transform this agriculture, which requires a whole bunch of reforms. And finally, I'll just mention there are many other issues, but the external sector, we've just had a high-level group on the external sector, which has submitted a report which has been appreciated by the government. So there are a lot of issues which have been raised there, mostly internal and some internal issues which also need to be addressed.
Okay, all right. We'll come to some of the other specific challenges in just a bit. But before that, Mr. Dua, are there any specific sectors? Of course, a lot has been said about how several steps and measures have been taken in the recent past, really, as far as the economy is concerned. Going forward, are there any specific sectors that we need to concentrate on?
Yes, I would say at least three of them. The first one is the rural economy as a whole. We've seen that if we neglect it or we do not take positive action to improve it, what can happen in the economy? The current slowdown in the economy at 5%, which was referred to by the earlier speakers, is largely because the consumption in the economy has gone down. Once consumption goes down, the cycle of investment gets disturbed, and we cannot afford to have a relapse in which we do not look at our agriculture, which is the main vocation in the rural areas. We cannot afford to let our employment guarantee scheme working there. We cannot be letting, as if saturation of the welfare programs in the rural areas has occurred and we don't need to spend more there. I'm referring to Pradhan Mantri's Gramin Sadak Yojana, Pradhan Mantri's Awas Yojana, as well as expenditure on irrigation, not the large kind of the large irrigation dams, but the smaller ones. All these are aspects which we need to address much more than before, and willy-nilly these are going to demand government investments, because private investment is not going to be coming into such sectors easily. So that's my number one area of area where we need to be looking at further, and that of course includes allied activities of agriculture, particularly dairying and fisheries, which are employment intensive as well as would add to the income of the farmers. That's number one. Number two is we have to be making sure that we give money directly to our consumers, be it in the urban areas or the rural areas, who today avail of the subsidized food from the public, with a huge network of public distribution system, because we need to subsidize them because we are spending so much on running the public distribution system, buying food, storing it, managerial cost of it, moving it. We need to move away from it to giving direct benefit to the consumers, subsidize the food so that they can consume more, particularly subsidize more the items. If you are continuing with the cereal support system of wheat and rice, then because you can't possibly be hanging on to it and letting it rot and be fit only for animals or to be just thrown away. We got to be spending that money to make the food prices lower for them, of at least the items which we procure to support the farmers. This is going to have the double benefit, one of hiking up the purchasing power in their hands so they can buy more goods and keep the investment cycle going. Plus, it is going to be reaching out to the farmers this higher minimum support price, guaranteed price. If we move on from the cereals then to what the customer wants today, consumer wants today, that is the higher proteins items like milk, the poultry items, including eggs, as well as horticulture and fruit, and vegetable items. So that is where the bigger support is required, and that's what the customer base is there for. That's number two. Third is this area of manufacturing. We have to be able to make it competitive. We have to address these issues of competitive in the export market. You cannot possibly be going on just protecting it through a regime of high tariffs or other barriers, trade barriers being created. What is required is, yes, we need manufacturing. There are no two views about it, but we have to do all that it takes to make manufacturing competitive, stand on its own feet, and that's how you would see your external sector reforming.
Okay, all
I
right.
think these are the three I would highlight.
Okay, all right, Mr. Dua, stay with us. I'm going to come back to you for another reaction. But so, Dr. Irmani, I'm going to take this issue that was raised by Mr. Dua forward with you, about manufacturing being competitive, about trade issues and so on and so forth. Let's not forget that the world too is becoming far more protectionist, led by US President Donald Trump. How much of all of that is going to have an impact on us?
Well, individual items always have an effect, but I think as far as the President Trump's views on trade protection and America are concerned, with the possible exception of the China element, I think some of that is waning. I think there was a big push. I think there is some differentiation which is happening. But leaving that aside, the overall issue, there is, as the World Bank report and I think even the IMF has pointed out, there is a general movement towards protectionism. But when we talk about India, we have to remember two things. One is that India's share in world trade, world exports is been stuck at 1 to 2%, when several other countries, smaller countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, etc., have increased their shares quite rapidly over the last decade or so. So, as far as India is concerned, there's still a lot of scope. The second point is that the external opportunity, which we have discussed earlier, but is worth mentioning again, this disruption of supply chains because of the US-China trade war, call it whatever you will, is going on. That disruption is going to have a permanent effect. Even if protectionism doesn't increase further from what it is today, it is going to have a permanent effect, and that provides an opportunity for us. So the opportunity, however, is no use unless we facilitate and clean up our own act, the kind of act which has kept us from, let's say, exceeding 2% of world exports. And those are some of the things we have already discussed: the taxation, the agriculture, the education and skills. But there are whole sectoral issues. For example, in textiles and other labor-intensive, my friend mentioned the labor-intensive sectors, whether it's textiles or electronics, etc. There are sectoral issues which need to be addressed. For example, give you one example in textiles. Textiles is the only sector where customs duties are still specific. That means they are as against ad valorem, the percentage, where most 90% of other sectors have percentage-wise. So what effect does it have? That means in every, like yarn, there is still that old-fashioned bureaucratic thing. Is it the yarn of 100 count or 200 count? And according to that, you have to pay a particular specific duty, which is absurd. Because that means every item you can do corruption and so on still prevails in textiles. So things like that, there are specific issues in each sector which need to be addressed if we are plus the broader issues which we have already mentioned, if we are to take full advantage of these opportunities.
Absolutely. Ban, I'm just coming to you in just a bit. Let me take one quick reaction from Mr. Dua, and then we can carry the discussion forward. So, Mr. Dua, talking about international trade,
Yes.
how important is it for us to finalize some of our FTAs, say with Europe and with some of the other regions and nations as well? Is that also going to be a big factor going forward? And what about taxation?
Let's first, these are two questions, two issues. Dealing with foreign trade first. Yes, it is necessary for us to become a partner of more and more trading blocs. The European Union The pact with the European Union has been pending for the last 12 years, since 2007, and then the South Asian bloc, which the treaty with the South Asia, pact with the South Asian nations, the RCEP, where we're going to see some movement being indicated either today or tomorrow. Both these are important, undoubtedly, and we need to be associated with them because we should not be isolated. All that is absolutely fine, but the trade agreements cannot be should not be entered into, and I think would not be entered into unless there is specific gain for us. The trade, international trade, is based on the premise of comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is that you trade with those items in which, relative to the other items you produce, what can or where are you better off to sell that? You send that. So it is a trade is invariably based on the principle of win-win, not win and cost to someone. So I think both with the EU as well as the RCEP, and I've seen some of these from very close quarters, I think there is obstinacy on the part of the European Union that we will not deal with manpower. We will only look at issues of industrial access, and with great difficulty with conceding that agriculture also becomes a part of it. That cannot be because our comparative advantage lies in manpower, skilled manpower, and what they produce. That's where the services come in.
Sure.
It's not merely in capital, which is investment related, or it is the other issues where the West has 100 or 150 years of advantage from us because the Industrial Revolution started there.
Right.
Similarly, you talked about taxes. I'm leaving alone RCEP because that's a separate issue, but the issues are exactly the similar. That dairying, if you open up agriculture, you will have goods from New Zealand rushing in here, dairying products, where in New Zealand only 10,000 dairy farmers are there. In India, probably you will have 10,000 in every district, and we have 600 odd districts here. There, the average size of a herd with one of these farmers is 1,000 animals. In India, it is below 2. So those are kind of, for us, it is a survival livelihood vocation. For them, it's a commercial one.
Right.
China, certainly, if you open up completely without having your agreements in place with China and without getting that due time to build your advantages, to be able to get to either a duty-free or a near duty-free stage, we certainly need time. We are not saying we are not interested in joining RCEP. We are, but we must also get something to win, and one of it, which we've identified, is with respect to items of mass production, processed, manufactured items vis-a-vis China, dairying vis-a-vis New Zealand, and things of the kind. Because for us, agriculture is an extremely important thing.
Right.
And
points taken.
For us, creating employment through manufacturing is equally important.
Okay.
Now,
All
the
right.
second point which you raised was with respect to taxation. Absolutely. We do need to reform our tax structure, and rather than the rates, I would say the emphasis should be on making it simpler, transparent, and predictable.
Okay.
In regulatory scheme of things, if you are not predictable, or if you make the compliance costs too high, or you are kind of, leaving too much of discretion, then people are not able to estimate what is the cost on account of taxation when they take an investment decision or when they take a decision on how much to produce. Even if once you have come in, that whether we don't know what we'll end up paying. And taxation, to my mind, is clearly a very important regulatory aspect. So, the rates would depend upon a variety of things, including the need of revenue for the government.
Absolutely. Points taken. All right, Mr. Doha, let me take the points that you're making to the other panelists as well. Thank you so much for joining us on the program and sharing your views on what exactly is the best way forward. All right, so Banu, let me come to you now. Thank you for very patiently hearing the other two panelists out. But, as far as challenges are concerned, a lot has been said and spoken about India's demographic dividend. Now, if the right steps are not taken, do you believe that that could turn out to be a disadvantage as well?
Yeah, our advantage is our demography. In fact, the South Asian group that is actually being talked about, that is going to drive 1/3 of the growth by 2040, is actually it's a good ecosystem to be a part of. Okay, it is a good ecosystem to be a part of only if it is beneficial to us, and that can happen only if we become competitive. For being competitive, like we should have a very reformed government, lean government, and also a very thriving private sector, which is given space by the government through regulation and other infrastructure reforms. So by private sector, I mean like people that are going to be involved in the private sector are mostly our youngsters, right? Like they are part of the biggest demography. So one is like providing the basic opportunities to youngsters, and second is to have the very reformed government and a very a reform space for private sector to operate and thrive.
What about the required skill sets as well?
Yeah, of course. So right now, like we have the gross enrollment ratio of our higher education is around 25%, and we are planning to go to 33% by 2025. Okay, so we are also moving to an era of certification where actually which is geared towards the gig economy. How we actually how nimbly we adapt to these situations, and how well we actually skill our youngsters is going to determine a lot of things. We actually sometimes talk about innovation and education in kind of a silo. If we actually look at agriculture, for example, I think the next 10 years are going to be, at least in India, be driven by innovations in agriculture. If you look at our agriculture colleges, okay, so the demand for agriculture graduates is 2x of how many ever seats are there, but the enrollment is only 50% of the seats, and so still we have that old mentality of agriculture being a very non-technical profession. But agriculture has moved so far away. If you look at the Food Valley in Netherlands and all these places, it is the hub of innovation, robotics, infrastructure, everything comes together, and innovations in biotech, everything is coming together to drive agriculture. So when we say that we are going to educate our kids and make them be innovative, it is going to drive all of this. It's going to drive agriculture, it's going to drive manufacturing, it's going to drive services, basically, which is going to drive the other two. So it is kind of a very holistic thing. One other often missed point is our urbanization deficit. So for example, if you take China, there are 160, right now there are 160 cities that have a population of more than 1 million, which has world class, the best in class infrastructure. In India, we have, the number is around 50, and our infrastructure is still being built. So there are huge costs to doing business. These are frictions that have to be removed by proper reforms and implementation of projects, so that our private sector has a space to operate. Our people have actually are more productive. Say, just think about reforming our slums, okay, or providing them basic infrastructure. How more productive can our people be? So all of this has to come together: urbanization, skilling, innovation, and one will drive the other thing. Once we do all of this, we'll become an effective partner in the ecosystem, which will actually have the ecosystem benefits. So right now, if you look at our dilemma with the RCEP, we are actually it's a good ecosystem to be a part of, but we are not competent enough to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So that is the dilemma, I think. But we are making progress. Maybe it's better if we make it faster.
Okay, all right. Quick closing comment from you, Dr. Virmani, with the best way forward.
To conclude, I think we often have this thing that when things are better, we stop thinking of the problem. So what we learn from the high growth economies is they are constantly on the job. They are constantly looking ahead because new problems arise. If you're very successful for example, in textiles, you will see that new problems will arise and so
Right.
on. Electronics or whatever. So the thing is that you have to be alert and you have to constantly think of how to address these problems as they arise.
Okay, all right, Banu, last word, very quickly.
Actually, we are in the right path. The basic structure of the development agenda is actually being constructed. The old way of doing business is being reformed, as we see from the banking reforms, NPA clearing, and the improvement in the ease of doing business and so on. But actually, we have to expedite this process. Like the contract bit is actually comes again and again, where we are still ranked 163rd. So, and also infrastructure.
Sure.
So all of this has to be like kind of accelerated. It's just about the pace of doing things from now on. I think we have the solutions. But how fast we implement it is going to determine much of how fast we will develop in the next few years.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.